It was just another day when I walked into the bank, ready to handle a major transaction that would set the course for my company's future. As a successful Black CEO, I expected professionalism and respect, as I had always received from the financial institutions I worked with. But the moment I stepped up to the counter, something shifted. The bank manager looked me up and down, his expression changing as he glanced at my business documents. Without even checking my account or acknowledging my status, he coldly told me that I'd need to go to a different branch to complete my transaction. The dismissal was sharp, and the condescension in his voice was unmistakable. I was being treated as if I didn't belong, as if my success didn't matter. But what happened next would change everything. Instead of leaving, I chose a different path. I wasn't going to let this moment slide or let the disrespect go unchallenged. I would return, but not for a simple transaction. No, this was something much bigger. I was about to show them exactly what happens when you underestimate a Black CEO. It was a typical Monday morning when I decided to pay a visit to the local bank where I held a significant account. I had been running my company for over a decade, and in the past year we had made substantial progress. Things were moving fast, and I was growing more accustomed to the weight of the power and responsibility that came with my position. I had an important transaction to make that day, one that could ensure the future of my company and open doors to even bigger opportunities. With a sense of purpose, I walked into the bank, dressed in my power suit, feeling confident and capable, as any CEO should. But little did I know, my visit would soon turn into an eye-opening lesson on how deeply ingrained prejudice still ran in places I would never expect. As I stepped inside, I immediately noticed the sterile, cold environment, the marble floors, the polished counters, and the staff moving briskly. There was a certain air of superiority in this space, which I found slightly off-putting, but I was focused. My goal was clear. I was there for business. I approached the counter where the manager, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, stood. I had met him before at a business event, and he had always been cordial, but today he seemed different. "Good morning," I said, giving him my most professional smile. "I need to finalize a transaction, please." He glanced up at me, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if unsure of what to make of me. His gaze dropped to my attire, no doubt wondering why someone who looked like me would walk into the bank with the intention of doing serious business. "May I help you?" he asked in a tone that seemed just a bit too dismissive for my liking. "I'm here to make a transaction for my company," I replied, offering him the documents I had prepared. "I need to speak to someone who can help with large account transfers." He took the papers from me but didn't immediately respond. Instead, he glanced toward the staff behind him, as though seeking approval. After a brief moment, he turned back to me and said something I will never forget. "I'm afraid we don't handle that type of transaction at this branch," he said, his voice dripping with indifference. "You'll need to visit the downtown location for something like that." I blinked in disbelief, my heart sinking. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a blatant attempt to dismiss me. I had been a loyal client of this bank for years, and my company's account held millions of dollars. Yet here I was, being told I wasn't important enough to be taken seriously. His tone and the way he had looked at me, like I didn't belong, hit me hard. I stood there stunned for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Was he really asking me to leave and travel across the city just to get the same service? Had he not even looked at my account or noticed the level of business I brought to this branch? But I didn't react. I stood up straight, gathered my papers, and walked out without saying another word. My mind was racing, but I didn't let my frustration show. As I left the bank, I could feel the weight of that moment pressing down on me, and I knew something had to be done about it. By the time I got to my car, I had already made a decision. It wasn't just about the transaction anymore. It was about respect, about being seen, about the way the world still treated people like me, successful, powerful, and Black, as if we were somehow less deserving of the same privileges. I went home, pulled up my laptop, and began researching the bank's policies. I wasn't just going to let this slide. I knew how these institutions operated, and I knew that even though I was in the right, there were still powerful forces at play that could make things difficult for me. But I wasn't about to back down. I spent the next few hours gathering every document, email, and communication that I had with that branch. I compiled a file of all my past interactions with the bank, all of the times I had invested money into their services. I also included my personal statement, my experience of what had happened earlier that morning. Then I made the call. I asked to speak directly to the CEO of the bank. The receptionist seemed surprised, but I insisted. After a brief hold, a calm, professional voice came on the line. It was the CEO himself. "Good afternoon," he said. "How can I help you today?" I explained everything to him, from my arrival at the branch to the way I was treated by the manager. I spoke without anger, but with conviction. I made sure he understood that this wasn't just about a bad interaction. It was about systemic issues and the way people like me were treated in spaces where our business was often overlooked. I could hear the CEO on the other end of the line growing more uncomfortable as I spoke. "I'm very sorry for what you've experienced," he said after I finished. "That is completely unacceptable. I will investigate this right away." I thanked him and ended the call, feeling a mix of satisfaction and apprehension. It wasn't enough to just make a call. I needed to make sure that this didn't happen to anyone else. The next morning, I received a follow-up email from the CEO's office. The manager I had dealt with had been fired, along with several other staff members who had witnessed the incident but had not intervened. The email was formal, but there was no mistaking the message. The bank had taken my complaint seriously. But the story didn't end there. A few weeks later, I walked into that same bank, not as a client, but as someone with the power to change things. I had been invited to speak at a meeting with the newly appointed branch staff. The bank had hired a new management team, and they wanted to ensure that this kind of thing never happened again. As I walked into the conference room, I looked around. There were people of different races, backgrounds, and experiences, but there was also a sense of openness in the room. These new managers were different. They had been trained in cultural competence and were committed to creating an environment that was inclusive for all clients. I spoke to them for almost an hour, sharing my thoughts on respect, diversity, and how to navigate challenging situations with empathy. I wasn't just trying to make things right for myself. I was trying to set a precedent for the future. It was my chance to make a difference in the very institution that had once tried to dismiss me. By the end of the meeting, I felt a sense of accomplishment. The staff members who had been present when I was humiliated had been replaced by individuals who were genuinely committed to fostering an environment of respect. As I left the bank that day, I realized something important. It wasn't just about the bank or the manager. It was about how we as individuals, especially in positions of power, respond to injustice. It's about taking a stand, demanding respect, and knowing that we can make a difference when we refuse to accept being treated as anything less than worthy. I walked away from that bank not just as a CEO, but as a force to be reckoned with. And in that moment, I knew that the world would be a little bit different, thanks to the power of one woman's resolve to never back down.